This is a Squiz podcast. We're your shortcut to being informed.
Our podcast today is brought to you by HubSpot. We all need more breathing room in our work days, and HubSpot gives it to you. Breeze, their built-in AI, takes care of the busy work so you can focus on growth. Welcome to The Call Sheet, the podcast that goes behind the scenes of Australia's entertainment industry, meeting the creative minds giving shape to our culture. I'm Andrew Williams. Marker. By some, the world of video games is still seen like a niche hobby. But that's very, very far from the reality. More than a third of the world's population plays video games in some form or another. And yes, if you've ever opened Tetris or had a crack at Candy Crush, that includes you as well. As a global industry, gaming brings in more revenue than film and music combined. And many of the trends that we're watching across news, music, and television, from the rise of creator-led platforms to questions of trust and sustainability, they're playing out in the gaming world as well, which is why I wanted to speak with Stephanie Bendixsen, or Hex, as many know her. She's an Australian video game critic, author, and former presenter of Good Game and Screenplay, and she was a pioneer as a female presenter in a male-dominated space. Hex is a great guide to what the world of gaming is all about and why people like she and I love it so much, but also what it's like to be someone whose job is to create content around gaming through traditional TV shows that she was on, all the way to her experience with YouTube, social media, and Twitch, the live streaming platform that's had a huge influence on gaming and culture more generally. And of course, this episode is about video games. We've got some recommendations for you if you're new to the whole space, but it's also about much more than that. It's about where entertainment, creators, and audiences are heading. Steph, thanks so much for joining us on The Call Sheet.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's awesome to be here.
It's lovely to have you here. I've admired your work from afar for a long time. Can you tell us about how you got started, because it's quite a story, how you ended up on the ABC in the first instance?
Yeah. So, I mean, I was always really nerdy as a kid. I was big into fantasy fiction and all that kind of thing. But funnily enough, my parents were quite anti-video games. So
right.
I never grew up with consoles, nothing like that.
Right.
I played a lot at friends' houses and stuff. I spent a lot of time trying to kind of get around anyone's house who had a console. And between my friends, I think I had them all covered between the, Mega Drive, Nintendo, everything.
Yeah, someone had a Super Nintendo, someone had a Mega Drive. Great.
Yeah. So I would kind of go on a rotation. Yeah, it was never something that I thought about pursuing as a career, because my understanding of video games was, if you're going to work in games, you had to be a programmer or a coder of some description. That just was never my forte.
Yeah.
And there also just weren't a lot of options for kids, I think, particularly women and girls' schools and stuff at that time. But I was really big into acting and performance, and I really loved writing. So while I was at uni, I was studying a Bachelor of Arts in creative writing as my sort of major. And then I ended up kind of going into performance, and all the while I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft and things like that, once I'd sort of moved out of home. At the time, there was a show on the ABC called Good Game that I would watch religiously, because it was the first time I think I'd ever seen nerd culture really celebrated. I think for a long time it was just something that people were maligned for or
sort of got shoved into the basement a little bit, that whole sort of stereotype around gamers.
Totally.
It's niche, it's something,
Yeah. So, I loved that show, and the ABC put a call out for new presenters when they launched their kids channel, and I thought that might be a cool opportunity. And so I made an audition tape that kind of represented me and the things that I liked. And through that process, I ran into Barjo at a convention, and he said they were actually looking for presenters for Good Game as well.
Yeah.
So I applied for that, and I went home and wrote a bunch of game reviews in the style of the show, because I was obviously really familiar with it, and went in for a screen test from there. And yeah, it was kind of a whirlwind.
Yeah. How exciting was it stepping onto the set of a show that you had watched? I feel like there would be very few people who have had that experience.
Yeah, it was absolutely surreal.
Yeah.
And it's like so exciting. The sort of downside was that around the same time, it was hosted by two male presenters at the time, and one of them was let go. And so he'd had some issues with management, I think, and various other problems that had been kind of building up for a while. And so he was let go, and he ended up being quite public with the fans, very small but dedicated fan base,
right,
about the fact that he'd been let go. And not only that, he was being replaced with the girl for the sake of like broad mass appeal or something like that. I'd never met him, so it was a pretty unfair assumption for him to make.
Yeah.
But that really made life impossible for me when I started.
Yeah, that would have been because, I mean, you talk about, I guess, how nascent video games were at the time in terms of the overall culture. Then that is multiplied again by being a woman in that environment, right? Because there were relatively few video game shows around. There were even fewer women presenting those shows and being involved in those shows at the time.
Yeah, it was a time when like women were a novelty in any kind of geek or tech space.
Yeah.
So people would refer to me as like girl gamer Stephanie Bendixsen because it was such an odd thing. Like you would never say boy gamer so and so, you know. But that was always kind of like the prefix of my name. And it was rough because you know, that audience really went out of their way to try and tear me down. And it was pretty devastating to get your kind of dream job and then face that. But my producer at the time, Janet Gator, she created the show.
Yeah.
She gave me the like best advice I will ever have, and she was just like, "You don't need to prove to yourself to anyone. Just let your work speak for you, and you won't have to."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what happened. And you know, the upshot of it was that when we launched the kids show, a bunch of girls started writing into the show saying, like, I've never seen a woman, you know, express her love for video games in this way, and it makes me feel like I can do the same. And it was very wholesome.
Yeah, it's always been bizarre to me, this idea that a lot of men have around video games and sort of gatekeeping it, which is this idea that, no, this is for us and you're not allowed to be in it. Because surely you want the thing you like to be more popular, so more money will flow into it and then will be more of it. It always seemed an illogical thing. I understand why they do it.
I think it was such a pressure cooker around video games because, for so long, nerds felt so ostracized by popular social communities and stuff that they really felt this ownership over video games being theirs. So when women came in, there was this sense of like, you don't love this enough, or you're not passionate enough, or you're not authentic enough. And it's such a horrible attitude to take because that just pushes people away and it doesn't help the industry grow or become more diverse or
I imagine there are lots of people that are watching this and listening to us who have never played a video game in their life. If they've listened to the Squiz today, they know that is not me. I am a huge fan. Why do you love video games so much? Are you able to even summarize it?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different reasons, and I think it's evolved and changed a little bit over time as technology and as video games have changed. Primarily as someone who loves storytelling and loves writing, I think what separates video games from every other medium from a narrative perspective is that it's interactive.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you're watching a film or a TV show or reading a book, you know, you're a passive consumer of that story. But when you're playing a video game, you know, sometimes there are options where you can affect the story, but even if there aren't, you're participating in actions that are playing out as a part of that narrative that make you already feel more connected to what's happening and it feels more immersive as a result. And beyond that, you know, obviously I know there's a lot of people listening saying, okay, well, you can't tell me that Fortnite is an immersive storytelling experience.
Minecraft.
Yeah. But I would argue that a lot of those games are really creative and cooperative and, you know, foster a really fun kind of team building environment. Yes, even Fortnite. The reason why Fortnite is so attractive to a lot of, you know, younger gamers is because it's super engaging, it's thrilling, and it's really fun, and it's a big sandbox environment that you can be in with your friends where you're just, you know, trying different things and seeing what works, and it's thrilling because it's competitive and you're working together. The wonderful thing about how video games have connected people is, you know, you're using your mind in such a unique way. And whereas binge culture of television has become so commonplace and accepted, you know, if someone says, I binged 2 seasons of The Office this weekend, people are like, oh, great, I love that show.
Yeah.
But if you say I played video games all weekend, you know, something that's using your brain, something that is, you know, social and engaging, and you're learning things, you know, even if it is a team building thing that you're learning or new mechanics or systems.
Yep.
Why is that demonized over just vegging out on a couch and just, you know, I don't understand that.
It is very strange, and it feels like a hangover that's 20 years old. And I talk about this a lot in terms of people's idea of what a video game is in some ways 15 to 20 years older than where they actually are these days. And you talked about narrative choices, and a lot of people would be familiar, I think, with ironically, The Last of Us, because it's a TV show, but it is one of the seminal video games of all time. And in there is a choice, and I won't give any spoilers in case anyone wants to play it, but there is a significant choice that the main character makes at the end of the game. And you don't have any say in it. You're making that choice no matter what. But I think the fact that you have gone through this journey and you have essentially played as this person and you have put yourself in those shoes makes that narrative choice much more emotionally impactful than it could ever be in a TV show when you've just watched someone do it.
It's so true. And it's also because, I think most people, when they get to that point, they will try to not perform that action, right? Because they don't want to, because you recognize that it's not a good thing to do.
Yeah.
But then you realize that it's not about your choice. It's about playing out the choice that the character makes and the subsequent repercussions of that. And it's awful, but it makes you feel a lot of things that I've never felt in a movie.
No, exactly. It's something that it is unique. Can you identify one sort of really significant way in which the business and the production of video games has changed since the time you've been working in it that has really stood out to you, and how we make them now and what goes into making them?
Yeah, I think it tends to move through significant changes when there are sort of big jumps in technology, and then also when there are kind of global recessions and stuff, and we see that reflected in the development industry.
Yeah.
Initially we would see a lot of kind of smaller indie games, and then we'd have kind of like a B grade category of just kind of mid-range games, and then big AAA titles.
Yes.
I think that kind of middle section has kind of been eradicated.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really great quality indie stuff that gets made now because people have better access to the tools to make games. More people are making them, and just the connectivity of the world is a lot easier. There's a lot of game development studios that work remotely with other different people all around the world just working on the same project.
Yeah.
So that's really great. And then at the other end of the spectrum, a lot of the kind of larger game companies are much more financially focused. And so they kind of either purged the smaller development arm studios or kind of absorbed them, and now focus on larger big titles and payment models that follow more of a live service method. And by live service, I mean something like Fortnite, which is a game that doesn't have a start and end. It's a game that constantly runs and has constant updates.
There's no Fortnite 2. It's just Fortnite, and it will be updated as a game, and it'll just stay that way for as long as the technology can support it.
That's right. And though it's free to play, they make their money through cosmetic microtransactions and things like that. So you can download a Sabrina Carpenter character model and do a Sabrina Carpenter dance in the game. And when you see 10 other people doing that, then you've got to do it too. And so
and that'll cost you, well, I don't actually know. I don't play Fortnite, so I don't actually know how much it'll cost, but it might cost you $5.
It all adds up really quick, let me tell you that.
It's like buying extra lives and Candy Crush and things like that people might.
And they've been very smart with their kind of commercial partnerships, so it's all the Marvel stuff, Disney, Star Wars, all that kind of thing that gamers love, and that's kind of the modern payment model. So from a business standpoint, I would say that's kind of how it's shifted. We're seeing less kind of The Last of Us is kind of a standout. We're seeing less crafted, cinematic experiences like that, and more live service games that are kind of delivering fun experiences that just have constant updates. That really kind of crafted beautiful video game experience is less common, but still out there. Yeah.
It's funny. It's almost exactly the same thing that happened in the world of cinema, where you suddenly you've got basically you have to be either a Marvel style superhero blockbuster or action blockbuster that costs $200-300 million to make, or you can be an indie film that costs $10 million to make. But sort of what I call the John Grisham movies, like the Runaway Juries and the Rainmaker and the Firm, those sorts of mid-level dramas just don't really get made and put to cinemas anymore, and streaming has taken those over.
And then also what we're seeing is that games are kind of shipped in a state where they're not entirely finished, because now that we have a much more sophisticated connectivity with the audience, then they just will ship a patch, post-release.
Essentially, think of it, if you're unfamiliar, think of it as if a movie comes out and then the day later they put a different version of the movie out that's edited. Like it just doesn't happen in any other art form in the world.
Yeah, like if they released the movie and they hadn't finished all of the graphics, and then they were like, "That's okay," because definitely go and see it, but like also you'd probably want to.
Imagine there's an explosion there. Like imagine there's just something in the back where it said insert explosion here and they haven't actually put it in yet. Yeah. That's what the game industry does, where they fix it a day after it's come out. Yeah.
There's a few rare studios now that still commit to the idea of you'll get it when it's finished.
Yeah.
And I know that's really hard when you've got shareholders and things like that are all waiting on a bottom line and stuff, but I feel like that should be kind of the way that games operate.
Yep.
I feel like the other sort of big shift that I've seen in the industry is, I guess, less from a business standpoint, but I suppose shows how the industry has changed in the time that I've been in it, is in how video games now are a little bit more accepting of a broader audience. Mm-hmm. So, for a long time, I think video games were made by men. So they were marketing games to men because that's who played them. They were making games for themselves, basically.
Yep.
And so this issue of like not enough women play video games was kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because, when you looked at what was out there, there weren't a lot of attractive options for women. And I mean to say that you need to target games to women specifically, but there's only so many like muscle-bound dudes with a massive gun on the cover of a video game. You can see before you're like, I don't really see myself reflected in that game, or like, But I even remember seeing Lara Croft when I was a kid and being like, so cool, even though she was so obviously designed
by a man.
By and for men.
Yeah.
It was just still seeing a cool character that had, 2 pistols and was, an archaeologist.
Yeah.
And so when that game franchise was rebooted and that character was redesigned, that to me was a really big shift in the gaming industry that just told me that things were shifting in a different direction.
Yeah.
Because they not only redesigned that character, made her more proportionate, and they gave her like pants.
Good start.
I would say it's like, more useful when you're like crawling through tombs and stuff and the jungle. But they hired a female writer to do that story, Rhianna Pratchett, Terry Pratchett's daughter.
Yeah.
So they gave her a lot of vulnerability and backstory, as well as making her a really cool action hero. And the big sort of thing was like, is this still going to appeal to men? And of course it did.
Yeah.
Because, surprise, people want to see a character who is competent and sure, she's still sexy, but in a functional way.
Human way. Yeah.
And has depth to her. So I think that was just, the test case that game producers needed to see of like, oh, okay, we can do this.
Yes.
And people will still buy the video games.
A message now from HubSpot. Time might be our most precious resource, and that's exactly what HubSpot gives back to growing businesses. Breeze, their built-in AI, handles those repetitive tasks that steal hours from your work week. Imagine a team of Breeze agents creating more content, finding prospects, and delivering better service, all without breaking a sweat. HubSpot customers are generating more leads and closing more deals in days, not months. Visit HubSpot.com/AI to learn more.
I did want to ask as well about your career, the other side of the gaming fence. People will be familiar with the idea of things like Twitch and streaming services, and they might have heard of people watching other people play games, and that might seem like a completely foreign concept of why that would be fun. I read another interview with you where you talked about how you kind of saw this coming a little bit, and you realised that you had to be on the internet and you had to move away from that mainstream media because that was where the world was moving. How did you find that transition, and what have you sort of grown to realise is important about this idea of watching other people play video games and streaming and building communities?
Yeah, it was really difficult in the start. I think, like a lot of people, I just didn't understand why people were shifting towards something that was, unproduced. And I then started to realize that it really is about the interactivity of it. So when you stream on Twitch, you have obviously a chat stream there, and the person who's streaming can interact directly with the audience. So I don't know if you've ever been around to someone's house and they're playing a video game and you start watching over their shoulder, and then you're like, well, maybe try go through that door. And suddenly you become heavily invested in what this person is doing, even though you're not playing the game yourself. And then the other thing is that I think people are so used to television being so overproduced and presented to you in a way that feels quite false, that everything to do with, social media and the internet is shifting more towards authenticity and just wanting to see, the reality of how people are. And so Twitch feels like it's just a window into a bedroom that looks like yours, and you can chat with someone in what feels like a much more open dialogue.
Yeah.
And nothing is rehearsed or produced in any way. And I think people find that way more appealing. I think also there's just something to be said for reaction content.
Yes.
There's a whole category on YouTube of people just reacting to things, which again, I thought was so stupid until one day I clicked on a video that was titled "Girl Watches Jojo Rabbit for the First Time." And I was like, I've seen that movie. That's a great movie. And I don't know who this girl is. Why would I care? But I clicked on it. And, an hour and 45 minutes later, I was bawling as she was bawling. And I was just like, there was some joy in knowing that she hadn't seen the film, but I had, and waiting for her to experience certain moments and, see what her reaction was going to be and hear her thoughts on it.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people might think that was a waste of an hour and 45 minutes of your life, whatever. But I think it's something that they can socialize with other people and with the creator and feel like they're more actively involved than just passively watching something again, which I think speaks to, video games versus television as a more interactive experience that people enjoy.
Do you think as, a lot of people are increasingly worried about AI and its impact on, what we're reading, watching, listening to, etc. Do you think that people are drawn to a level of authenticity now? They probably always have been, but do you think it's as important to be yourself now, in the face of that?
I think that's a really interesting question. I would say yes. I don't know that it's necessarily AI that's prompting that, but I think more so with the rise of social media, I don't know if you guys watched that, there was that Netflix documentary called The Social Dilemma.
The Social Dilemma, yes.
And it showed the suicide rates that skyrocketed in 2009 when social media hit.
Particularly amongst young women. Yeah.
Just devastating. Social media just had the most horrendous effect on my mental health. And I can't escape it because it's a big part of my job.
Yes, yeah.
I had to just unfollow everyone in my industry because I can't be comparing myself to other people. Mm-hmm. And I found that some of my favorite moments on Twitch is when I just go live, and it's a big ADHD thing, but I'm a huge oversharer. So I probably say too much that I shouldn't, or share too much about myself personally. But I find that when I do that, people are just so grateful for a human connection or relatability. Yeah, there is a little bit of people searching for authenticity in that, because there is so much of the world that is presented to us in a way that is like, you can have it all, or this person has the most beautifully curated life. Or, and I have to keep, even among my friends, I have had a lot of really cool jobs for my work, and it is obviously my job to make that experience look as fun as possible because I'm showcasing it and I'm promoting it. But, I had a friend who has two kids. I don't have kids.
Yeah.
So I have a very different life. I play video games for a living and I don't have kids, and I have different struggles to the next person, but they're still struggles in a different way. And so I had a friend message me. She's just like, man, you live a blessed life. Mm. And I was like, I do, but I want to make it clear that this trip has not been fun in the way that you think it is, because I'm not experiencing it the way I'm showing that I'm experiencing it, because I'm looking through a camera lens. I'm filming everything, over and over and over again because I'm trying to get the shot.
Yeah.
I'm stopping and starting, and I'm telling everyone to stand in a certain way, and then people are leaving, and I'm like, I just need to upload a bunch of stuff. And so it looks, the shot that you see is me running on a beach being like, best day ever.
It is. I think that's a really interesting point, that the more people curate their lives online, which they did particularly, I think that was really big in sort of the mid to late 2010s.
For sure, yeah.
And then there was this sort of move backwards where people started going, we know that's not real now, and we're looking for people that are being more real so that we can experience the same thing or learn that we're experiencing the same things as those people.
Yeah.
Is that, that's more what's leading to that sort of popularity of Twitch and that search for authenticity.
100%. I think that's bang on the money. And it's so understandable. And yet we still kind of present a very filtered version of ourselves to the world. But obviously we're going to do that because we want to still share things that make us feel good.
Yes.
But I think it's just important as well to have the discussion around it of what's really going on. And and checking in with one another, I think is what's important. And I think, live platforms allow you the opportunity to do that.
Have you found, did you sort of grow to love it as you did it, or are there things about it that you grew to love as you continued to do streaming?
I think so. I think with all of this stuff, once you add kind of like a monetary thing to it, it kills it a little bit because it becomes a source of income. I think once I kind of removed that pressure from myself, so I don't stream now for money, like I make a negligible amount of money from it.
Yeah.
Now I just try and focus on doing it to engage with the community that support me and other stuff that I do. And that is a much better relationship to have with it. I think for people that stream full time, I really admire that because I think that's really hard.
Yeah.
And it's hard because, from a content creation space, we've seen this industry really explode. And what I think happens with all of these things is that, in the early days, people are excited about it. They want to support the creators that they like. And a lot of those people can support themselves through that platform. Then as it becomes more oversaturated and, people need to start choosing who they want to give their money to across a broad range of content creators, then that becomes harder for that person because, even though they're trying to grow their audience, people are spending their money across more people. And then, a cost of living crisis or something happens and people are like, well, hang on, I can't keep giving all of my money to people on the internet.
Yeah.
Then those creators are like, okay, well, how am I going to support myself if I'm no longer making enough money through my audience? Well, they'll do sponsored work and advertising and things like that. And then their audience is like, why is this all ads now?
Yes.
We don't want to watch you anymore. And so then it's kind of this slow implosion of an industry that is really difficult to predict where it's going to go. But that kind of tends to be what happens. So you need to, I guess, future-proof yourself for those kinds of eventualities because it's inevitable and make sure that you don't have all your eggs in one basket.
Yes. So lots of people would have seen Twitch getting, incredibly popular. How important has it become to people who actually make games in terms of getting the word out about those games?
I mean, it's a double-edged sword in many ways because a lot of people want the players to experience the game for themselves the first time, buy it and play it.
Yeah.
So if you're watching someone else play it, maybe that will prevent you from wanting to have the experience yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also be a great promotional tool where you see someone play a bit of it and you're like, actually, I'm not going to watch any more of this because that's sold me on the game and I want to go and buy it.
Yeah.
It's hard to know what's more beneficial for you as a game developer.
Yes.
But what's interesting to me is how they've adapted their approach to making games to suit a Twitch audience. And I would say the closest comparison is, during that period of Instagram food craze where everyone was going to the next restaurant that did like the 12-stack donut on a thick shake or whatever, dry ice thing that you'd have at a restaurant that you would film, And so chefs felt this pressure to start curating their meals based on how they would look when someone filmed them rather than how they tasted, which is kind of insane, but that was the way the world was at the time.
Yeah.
There is a little bit of that, I think, where people make fun, kind of silly horror content that has a big reaction or that, is really fun for people to stream to an audience, but has a short kind of durational, play value. There's a bit of that happening for sure. And then I think the other side of it is developers being like, we don't want to cater to that audience and we don't care about how people are consuming this on Twitch. We just want to make the game that we want to make. Mm-hmm. And if people enjoy it, then great. And if they don't, they don't. So, it kind of moves in waves, I think, where people feel like they need to adapt to whatever trends are happening. And then there is a reactionary shift away from it when people get frustrated by it. So, it's been interesting to watch surf the wave of that whole experience.
A message now from Aware Super, which has just made retirement even more affordable by lowering admin fees by up to 25% for their retired members. With cost of living front of mind for many Aussies, Aware Super is committed to keeping costs lower and delivering the benefits of being one of Australia's largest super funds. So with more of their members' money staying invested and working hard, your retirement savings are in good hands if you're with Aware Super. With lower retirement admin fees, Aware Super is super helpful. Consider if Aware Super is right for you and the PDS and TMD at aware.com.au. Amount of fee reduction will vary based on account balance, issued by Aware Super Proprietary Limited, trustee of Aware Super.
what is our industry like in Australia? Do we have a video game industry in Australia that is making games that people can play?
Yeah, we definitely do. It's similar to the film industry in that we don't have the budget or resources that they have overseas, so it's never going to be as big. I think probably one of the biggest games that kind of came out of Australia, at least from my memory, was LA Noire, classic LA detective game from the 40s.
Yeah,
I would say most of the big hitter games that come out of Australia are either sort of in the mobile category or in the indie space.
Yes.
So House is a great developer who created Untitled Goose Game, which was kind of a surprise hit.
Yes.
It's a charming little game where you play as a mischievous goose on a farm whose only goal is to kind of cause disruption for the people around him. And it's charming and wonderful, and the music is beautiful, and it's one of those games that you kind of just play for the delightful experience of being a goose. And Big Ant Studios do a lot of sport games like cricket games and AFL, obviously big sporting nation in Australia. So and then the other sort of surprise game was Unpacking.
Yes.
By Witchbeam, which again is such a difficult game to describe to people who don't understand the simple joy of performing a certain task.
Yeah.
From its aesthetic design is quite retro looking. It's very pixelated but cute, and you're given a series of boxes and you need to unpack them and place the objects in a person's home, or pack them because they're you're moving through a person's life as they move through various different stages from childhood through to university and beyond. But what you start to realize as you're unpacking the objects, because you can tell a lot about a person's life through their things, is that you start to learn little pieces about the various stages of their life, what's happened within their relationships, whether the relationship is going well or not, if they've become close or distant with their family. And then you become very intimately connected to this person through their things. So you spend so much time looking at someone's possessions and trying to learn about who they are that you feel really connected to them by the end. And so it's a really unique way of telling a story through objects. And at the same time, you have this wonderful meditational joy of just, where do I want to place everything in this room?
Yeah.
How would this person want this room to be set up based on what I know of them from the things that they own?
Yes.
And people just loved it. I adored that game, and it had beautiful music and a lot of really thoughtful details.
Yeah. Are there games that you recommend as a good starting point for people that are new to the industry, have felt left out of it, and maybe is a good gateway to them to get into this whole idea of what a video game is?
Yeah, I mean 100%. And this is what I think is, I suppose, frustrating for me when I'm talking to people who don't understand just what's out there in terms of video games. But, people see Fortnite, Call of Duty, GTA publicized a lot in the media because those are the games that become controversial for various different reasons.
Yes.
Either people are playing them too much or just the content, particularly when younger gamers pick them up.
Yep.
But just like film, there is such a broad range of different genres, from puzzle games to civilization city builders to really incredible cinematic narrative experiences that don't really require much input or dexterity at all if you don't know how to use a controller or you don't have a lot of experience with video games. There are a lot of games that have very minimal reliance on input
skill.
Reflexes and things like that. And you can still enjoy the experience of playing the game. And there are also some really wonderful cooperative experiences that you can play with someone else, which is wonderful as well. So if you're just sort of starting out and looking for an experience of what's out there, I would recommend something like Firewatch, that kind of storytelling mystery game that is has wonderful performances from actors that you would probably even recognize from television.
Yep.
Incredible art and a really intriguing, wonderful story, and moves at a pace that is very approachable.
Yes.
And there's another game called What Remains of Edith Finch, which is also kind of a similar genre, I suppose, that is narrative and there's a bit of a mystery to it. But there are some small kind of puzzles and things that you need to solve and figure out. But a lot of it is just to do with interacting with things and picking them up and having a look. That kind of thing.
And I will, if I can just nerd out ever so slightly,
Sure.
having played both of those, they're both wonderful games, but also just to add, the first game that I played, it made me go, oh, this is more than guns and jumping and running. which is in that same sort of genre, which is sometimes pejoratively called a walking simulator, because all you're essentially doing is walking around and picking things up and looking at it.
Yeah.
But there's the game called Gone Home from around the same time, which just kind of taught me that this can be more than that, and it's an incredible piece of art.
Yeah.
It's just it's so well made. So that very similarly, and I remember Firewatch was one of the first games I introduced my partner to, say like, this is what these games can be, and she loved it and still talks about it to this day. Like, it was such a great experience for her to play.
Yeah, and so I guess going into these games, it's important to understand that these are games that you don't win. It's a story that you sort of reach the end of, and the more you explore and interact with the world, the more you'll get out of it. And then I would say even something like Life is Strange, which gives you a little taster of that story. Like choice-making narrative mechanic, which is really interesting. And there's also a bit of sort of time manipulation in that, which is really nice. It's kind of like an adolescent story, but it has a lot of more mature themes in it. So it's a really beautiful game to play. And then I would say something like it's a little bit more dexterous, I suppose, but because it's co-op, I would say that it can be a little bit more forgiving. I would say It Takes Two or Split Fiction by the same developer are both you rarely find games these days that are specifically designed as co-op games to be played with someone else, and you cannot play them by yourself.
Yep.
And it's a really wonderful experience to play that. If you have someone in your life who is a gamer who you want to be able to connect with, or they've been wanting you to get into video games, if you present them the idea of playing one of these games together, that can be a really wonderful experience to connect.
We'll put a link to all of these games that we've mentioned, or as many of them as we can, into the episode notes. Steph, thanks so much for your time. Really loved having you on the show. Thanks for teaching our audience about video games if they didn't already know, and hopefully someone there's picked up something that they might be able to play going forward. Yeah,
Firewatch is my number one recommendation. I think you'd really enjoy that. I don't know you, whoever you are, but you'll love Firewatch.
I can second that. It's a wonderful game. Steph, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me.
A final message from our partners at HubSpot. Breeze, their built-in AI, is changing how work gets done. It handles the busy work so you can get back to creative, strategic thinking. And honestly, couldn't we all use a little bit more of that?